So, good afternoon, everybody. This is Robin Howe. I am. We are in the first week of the adolescent course at Loyola here, and I've been reading through your posts this week, and I've really enjoyed reading them thus far, and your introductions. And so, first of all, I want to say hello again, and nice to meet you all. Um, Wanted to share a couple things. One, I know you guys are probably um, having a different experience than most other Loyola students have in years past, just because the need to stay home and do everything remotely. And so I'm sorry you're experiencing that. Had the opportunity last year to go and speak at Loyola at a forum, and it was great. And so I'm just sorry you're missing out on that. But that being said, I hope you're having a good week, and I hope your families are safe and you're safe, and many of you are just finishing up your school year, and I have a couple thoughts on that I figured I would just share with you. Um, as a school leader myself, I know that these last 3 months have been some of the hardest months of my life. Um, as a Montessorian, trying to essentially overnight adapt to an online program, and as you all know and are learning more and more, that Montessori is really much more than just a curriculum that we can throw online, right? It's interactions, it's dealing with each other, it's compassion, it's empathy, and that doesn't even take into consideration the need of the work of the materials. So it's been really hard. So I hope that you guys are all doing okay. And I hope that you had enough time sort of between the end of your school years if you're working in school. And I know some of you are still working in schools. So I hope you've had enough time to sort of digest that a bit. And so what I'm suggesting is, just if you haven't done that yet, give yourself permission to take a deep breath. It's been wild. I know the term that everybody uses is unprecedented, and certainly is unprecedented. Everything is unprecedented, and then you throw into the mix what's going on in the United States right now. And I know that there are many of you who are not in the United States, but I know that there's unrest in the world right now. So before we even talk about anything, just hope you all are doing well, and I hope you just take some time every day to just be, and recognize that it's been challenging. So, in reading your posts, what I've noticed is that most of you are working in situations with early childhood, or have experience with early childhood, which is not uncommon, of course. Early childhood programs are much more common in Montessori than elementary programs, and certainly much more common than in secondary programs. Many of you have never experienced a secondary program, so I figured I would talk a little bit about what a secondary program might look like, and also then address just some sort of thoughts I have in terms of comparing the first plane and the third plane in particular. So, as I've mentioned before, both in my writing and in my videos, I had the opportunity to attend a Montessori secondary program as a child, the Berry School, which is not very far from Loyola. And then I had also the opportunity to lead a secondary program and teach in a secondary program for many years. And as you all know, getting a secondary Montessori credential, like any Montessori credential, is a multi-year process, so it's going to be impossible to help you really understand really what it is, or give you curriculum, if there is even curriculum, in just 8 short weeks. But what I found is most sort of important when thinking about Montessori at the secondary level is that it's not so much a set of lessons like we have at early childhood or elementary, but it's more of an approach. And I think part of that stems from the need for different schools in different places to line up their curriculum often to meet different standards. So, for example, if I'm teaching in Florida and there are certain courses I have to teach in order to prepare my students for graduation at the end of the year, I may have to teach the same courses, as a bad air quote, same courses as a public school or a traditional school. So I may still have to teach, biology or chemistry, physics, whatever is required, and do the same number of years, and that may differ from state to state. Many Montessori schools try to get external accreditation so that way their diplomas matter, so their kids can get into college. Or some schools choose to go the IB route or the Cambridge route because they feel like it's going to attract more people and give more viability to their programs. So they look differently. But one thing that I think remains consistent is the idea of helping your children develop the skills that they've started developing earlier on in their Montessori experience. So that is things like independence. So now a child who, at 3 years old, we were allowing them to carry their own glassware and wash their own dishes and make their own food. At the secondary level, what that really means is it's an extension of the independence. So now, when they're 13 years old or 16 years old, they're able to do many more things. So giving them the opportunity to create their own experiences, make their own decisions, what they can now do and what they're expected to do as members of the society that has changed. But it's essentially a continuation of what we've been trying to do. In terms of teaching, whereas most traditional schools will tell you what you need to learn. Okay, here are the dates that, today is Juneteenth. Here is the history behind Juneteenth. Here are the dates that you need to remember. Here are the important people. And then at the end of the week, we're going to take a test. And then once you've taken that test, then you can forget about it until we get to the final exam, and we're good. In a Montessori secondary program, things like dates and people are important, but what's more important is contextually understanding why it's relevant. So, for example, a conversation or a meta-narrative is, why was this holiday started, and why is it important now? Has this existed over time? So really, instead of having a very superficial understanding of something, we want them to be able to take information, understand information, use it to create original ideas, and more importantly, use it and understand it, how it relates to their own lives. And I would suggest that exists for most areas of the curriculum. There are things like writing mechanics that they have to learn how to write a sentence. They have to learn how to use capital letters. In math, algebra is algebra. There are certain variations where you can help them understand practical context, but really we want them to understand why they're learning what they're learning and why it's important and how it relates to them, and we want them to be engaged in their learning more than what we see at traditional schools. Even if thinking about things like a literature study, if we're reading a book, we want them, of course, to learn the skills of comprehension, and we want them to learn to write about it. We want them to write expository essays about concepts there. But more than anything, we want them to be able to engage in meaningful conversation about characters or something that's going on. If we're reading a book about a rite of passage or a coming of age, we want to understand, why is it important? What does it mean to come of age? What does it mean to be part of a civilization or a community, rather than just, okay, yeah, I remember his name and I can get it correct on the test. So I want you to think about secondary Montessori education from the context of, it's not about just sharing information to get a grade, but it's really developing a deeper understanding of the content and how the content relates to us and how the content contributes to our understanding of how to participate in a community. So, which gets me back to the earlier idea of looking at that first plane in particular in comparison to the third plane. So the first plane of the child, from 0 to 6 is, as we've all sort of probably heard over and over again, is super important, because literally we go from infancy and birth to 6 years old. We've literally gone from a being that is no less being, but is still very much or entirely dependent on others, right, for feeding, for protection, can't walk, can't speak, can't communicate, and then up through 6, they develop syntax, they develop communication, they're physically able to move, they've grown at a rate that is incredible to think about. If you think about a baby that's born at 6 pounds, and by the end of 6 years old, they're 40 or 50 pounds, or less, that's a considerable amount of growth. So if you think about it, that is a huge amount of growth. So it is really important. And then they have that second plane where things are sort of tapering out or refining. They're still growing, they're still learning, but they're not learning as much as they can during that first plane. It's just biologically, that's just the way things happen. But then when they get to the third plane, think about adolescence and when puberty hits, which of course, as we know, is not as soon as they hit 12 or whatever. It's a spectrum, right? Then they have another incredible growth, right? Um, so their bodies are changing, their minds are changing, and there's an incredible amount of effort that goes into that. Um, so they're very similar in certain ways, and even just trying to think about kids as they're going through adolescence, trying to maneuver their new bodies, and also how do they maneuver their new stature. The third plane is really when a child is transitioning from childhood to adulthood. So in addition to the incredible amounts of physical growth that they're experiencing, and the cognitive growth that some suggest is slows down a bit, I would not necessarily say that it slows down so much as it's reallocated, but they're really trying to figure out how to exist as adults and contributors. And it's not just that that's what's expected of them, it's that they have a desire to. In the same way that a child in an earlier plane has a desire to possibly appeal to their parents and receive love, the child entering the third plane wants to be a contributing member of society. They have a hunger to be treated as a member of society. And part of what their work is to figure out, how do I fit in? And that's a really hard thing, and I expect it gets harder and harder as our world changes. I mean, if you think about right now what's going on in the world, I can't even imagine trying to figure out, how one contributes. Does one contribute by being financially contributing, or being socially active, or politically active even? I don't even know. But part of their work is figuring out how they fit in to the bigger world of adulthood. And that does not happen overnight. That's something that happens over a series of years. Obviously, it's not just the third plane, because that's going to continue to evolve as they literally enter adulthood, and then once they leave high school and enter college and the workforce. So that's going to continue to evolve. But I want you just to think about that. That is really an important piece of what they're doing. There's a concept in secondary Montessori education called valorization. So valor, meaning value, right, is a huge piece. They want to feel valued. So what can we do as guides to help create opportunities for them to feel valued? And so when we get into later work down in this course, and we talk about things like the Urtkinder and just various different things you're going to read, one of the purposes of these programs is to create opportunities where these children in the third plane can do things that they have to do in order to feel value. And not only is it about them feeling value, it's being valued by others. So if you create an opportunity for a child to have a responsibility that others are going to depend on, their successful ability to do those things are part of a bigger workforce that will then help them feel valued. And that's, in addition to the Urtkinder model, when you look at all these different microeconomies that exist, that's part of the reason too. We want them to feel like the work that they're doing is meaningful, is contributing to something larger than themselves, and is valuable, and is needed, and is necessary. If you think, for those of you who have who either work with adolescent children or have your own children, or even think back to your own childhood, as we sort of start entering that next phase, we don't want to be perceived as children. We don't want to sit at the kids' table. We want to be involved in adult conversations. Doesn't mean we're ready for it, and I'd say in many cases we're not. I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but just as we go through this course, think about those sort of major concepts and those major themes, and for those of you who express sort of your, I wouldn't call it concern, but your apprehension possibly of delving into an age that you're not familiar with, keep that in mind, that they're very much like the child in the first plane, and that they're going through major physiological changes, and they're going through major, social changes. So, at any rate, I hope that sort of helps, and you'll see that through the readings you get. But it's sometimes helpful, I think, to have a different perspective than necessarily academic writing. One of the things that I'm going to be sending out, possibly with this video, is an invitation to our first Zoom meeting. And what I have done is I've asked a series of former students of mine who are now either in college or going into college to join us. And what I'm going to ask them to do is to share their experience of what a secondary Montessori experience is like, and hope and give you all the opportunity to ask them questions. And it'll be I may give them some leading questions just to think about, but really want you all to hear from their mouths. As I'd expect, it's going to be pretty powerful. So I hope you all have a wonderful first week, and I look forward to reading the rest of your posts. And please feel free to reach out. I think everybody should have received the direct email that has just a list of due dates. And so please feel free to reach out if you need anything or if you have any questions. Take care.